his story and his journey is very interesting. And I know he's going to share a little bit about that. But just his journey here, coming to Hawaii, adapting, and then some of the leadership roles that he's really taken on, especially his most recent one now as CEO of Queens. I don't envy him with the challenges that he has to do in running a healthcare system, not just on Oahu, but across our state. And so I'm very happy and appreciative of Jason spending some time here today with all of us. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica and Noah to kind of kick it off. So thanks, folks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erica, and with me today is Noah. We'd like to welcome everyone to the Leadership Seminar Series of SIP presented by the Hayashida family. An amazing speaker here today, so let's jump right in. Noah will start off by introducing today's speaker, Jason Chang.
Jason joined the Queens Health System in 2015 as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, and was later appointed President of Queens Innovation Institute and Executive Vice President of Innovation and Strategy. An accomplished healthcare executive, Jason has more than 18 years of executive leadership experience in both the for-profit and nonprofit healthcare sectors. His background includes hospital and health system management, ambulatory service and clinical program development, clinical integration and physician network development, and strategic development of innovation and technologies. He currently serves as the chair for the Blood Bank of Hawaii Board, Vizient West Coast Network Board, and the Oahu Workforce Development Board. He is also a board member for the St. Francis Healthcare System. He is deeply committed to Queen's mission in meeting the healthcare needs of the community. Now I'll hand it off to Jason to begin his presentation.
Yeah, so thank you. That was more than you had to say about me. I'm Jason Chang. I'm the president and CEO of the Queens Health Systems. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and just share my story. Most of the time, I'm telling stories about the hospitals that we're going to build. I'm trying to convince the legislature, why they have to fund something that's important to the state. And this time I get to talk a little more personally. And so I'm a transparent person. I think you'll find that. And if there's any questions about anything that's happening, I'm happy to dive into it. So what I thought I'd do today is just show you some pictures of my past and they kind of align with themes and stories. And just tell a series of stories, that kind of led me to where I am today and kind of touch on some of the topics that I think, help create, the leader that I am, and hopefully, can inspire you in different ways as you either are pursuing, your ultimate destination in life and or thinking about just how all these different leadership principles make us better people and make us live in a better society. And so I'll start with the first one. So this is where I'm from. This is a little town in the central of California called Parlier. So anyone knows where Fresno is? This is about 45 minutes south of Fresno. This town largely made up of farmers. And this is a packing house. A picture of my grandfather here, John Kapiki. He was a farmer. He was part of World War II's internment camp. So Executive Order 9066 took place. He was part of that. And at the end of the war, he came out here and farmed in one of these. And I got this from Google Earth, and it's a little sad because this used to be kind of a thriving area of all tree fruit. So these orchards were peaches and plums, nectarines and grapes, oranges. And I've done every job you could possibly work on this farm, which is why I'm not in farming. And I wanted to share just kind of two stories. And so we used to have trucks coming in and out of here all the time. And does anybody here, probably don't even remember it, Harry and David, has anyone heard of Harry and David Fruit of the Month Club? So we used to pack the nectarines and the plums for Harry and David. So when you would order that online out of the catalog and you give it as a gift, we would have to make the boxes. So our job as a kid, and I think I was 7 years old when I got my first job there. And me and my cousins would sit around. My uncle would come and tell us, you got to make 10,000 boxes today. And so you'd show up and we'd sit there, and this shed right here was full of corrugation. So it was just stacks of these boxes and then stacks of the foam that you put inside the box. And we'd sit there and we'd fold these boxes, and you're 7, all you want to do is go to my grandma's house, which was here, and swim in their pool. And so the faster you could build these boxes, the faster you can get out of there. But it just taught us that, work is work. This is a family business. Small business. We used to pack all the fruit for all the Japanese farmers that used to live in that area. If anyone knows sort of like post-World War II, a lot of the Japanese that were interned just farmed. You know, they got together and they kind of were collaborative and they farmed. And my grandpa happened to put the packing house together because no one would buy and pack the Japanese farmers' fruit. So that's what he did. And over time, you know, developed it into a business. And we used to have to build the boxes. And so you learn the principles of hard work and doing things that are more for family and not necessarily yourself. And then when I turned like 11, I graduated. I didn't have to fold the boxes anymore. I could drive a forklift, or I was driving a tractor out in the fields, and have very vivid memories of that. So I want to tell you a story. I was in high school. I'm now, I think, 16 or 17 years old, and I now graduated to loading trucks. And so we had this policy that any of these 18-wheeler trucks that come in, we used to have a loading dock, and there'd be 10 different loading bays. And if you come in before 9 p.m., we'd load you. That was just a policy. And I was one of 2 people that would load those trucks. And the worst would be on a Friday night, it'd be 8:30 and 4 trucks would show up. And all you wanted to do is go hang out with your friends. And you're like, I'm going to be here till 3 in the morning. But we knew like you had to load these trucks because as soon as you load them, they're driving off to Walmart, they're driving off to Safeway, they're going off somewhere delivering all of this stuff. And perishable fruit only lasts about 2 weeks. So, you know, you think about how we get fruit and produce here in Hawaii, especially when it comes from all over the place. These little bands that you can keep that fruit sellable and fresh, it's pretty small. And so as soon as like you load the truck, if they had to drive to Texas, those guys are out of there. So we would sit there and just load trucks. And at that time, you know, I'd always I'd just be miserable. So pissed that I was there loading trucks, and my friends would be, there were no cell phones, so they couldn't call you and talk to you either. So they're out having fun, and you know, you're sitting here working. But I think, you know, what I realized is that, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, the friends that I had then, they're the closest friends now today. It didn't matter whether you were at the party or you were working over here, you know, that those relationships were really important. But this is where I grew up. You know, it's important, and I still, when I go back to my parents' house, which is about 4 miles from this packing house, I still stop by and, you know, just check it out, bring back some of those old memories. So I shared a little bit about my grandfather and my grandmother, who were part of the internment camp. So my grandfather was going to Davis at the time. He was a senior, and this happened back in the May timeframe. So everybody that was about to graduate couldn't graduate. They just had to like pack up all their stuff and start heading to these internment camps. They ended up in Poston, and that's actually where they got married. My mom and my aunt were both born in the internment camps. My grandfather then decided that he was going to volunteer to prove that he was also, we don't know, they were all labeled as enemy aliens. Their citizenship, American citizenship, was taken away. My grandfather was actually born in Maui, and then his parents took him to Southern California. That's where he grew up. Was American. He was down in internment 3,000 other people to prove that they were Americans, not Japanese, and that they deserved their citizenship. So they volunteered for what was called the 442. And at the end, as I was growing up with him, I was very close to my grandfather. He never ever talked about his experiences. Never would brag about the war he was in, or never talk about the experiences, the sorrow, the hardships. But you knew, as you just read about the 442, that they were still the most decorated Army combat battalion in the history of combat. So you knew that there's stories to tell. And so I got involved with the JACL, the Japanese American Citizens League. And at the time when I first got started, 1996, 1995. So I was still in high school, and I was one of like the junior members. And the reason I joined was because you could learn about these stories, and what they were doing is advocating. The JACL was advocating. They advocated for redress, which got the United States government to prove and admit that this was wrong. The internment camps are wrong. And at the time, they were working on congressional gold medals and honorary degrees at the University of California schools, just because a lot of these students got sent out, and then 3 years later, none of them went back. And so I actually spent a lot of time with the JACL. I would go back and forth in the San Francisco office and wherever I was living at the time. And then we started going to Washington, D.C. and following around these lobbyists that would go in and tell the story. And I remember the day that President Obama penned and signed that they were going to honor 442, the MIS, and the 100th Battalion, all with congressional gold medals. And so I remember the date. There were these freedom planes that were donated, the culminating event, and my grandfather had passed before, so he knew that they were going to be recognized and awarded. And he had signed up to go to the event, but had passed in between. But everybody that was a member was going to get there. I think we had 4 people that were on medical watch because they were not safe to fly to Washington, D.C., but they were going to go. But that was important because just understanding, the history, and this history happened to be really close to me, molded me. It changed a little bit of, the way I thought. And I think the one thing is really around diversity. Think about diversity, equity, inclusion as programs now, and whatever the federal government and Donald Trump wants to do, that it's alive, it exists. And if we don't have people that stand for diversity and equity and inclusion, whether it's in healthcare, which is my area, or within a business, then you can create these very stern silos that are hard to break down. And if why is no better example of a melting pot, where else is? Because we have people from all these different cultures and we get along, and I think that's the best part about being here in Hawaii. And if anyone has questions, just feel free to chime in and ask. So flash forwarding a little bit. So this was my first opportunity to become a vice president of healthcare in any job. First chance. So this is a picture of Sister Ruth Dixon, and this is my first hospital. So my first job in healthcare, right out of college, was running radiology centers. So I was the guy that would take these CDs that were printed off, and I would drive them in my car to all the doctors that referred them. I was the courier. And in that job, just you don't know, where that was going to take you, but you just worked hard at it. And eventually they said, well, we want you to do some marketing, and then they want you to do some more outreach. And then at one point, the executive director left and told the doctors who were the partners that Jason is the person that should lead this organization next. Not a huge organization, but it was like a doctor's office with about 35 employees. And that was my first chance to actually manage people. And I was young, I was in the early 20s. And I was like, holy crap, what am I in for? And then we built more imaging centers. We built Sierra Imaging Associates. We built Cancer Research Associates. We built the Women's Imaging Associates in this town of Central California. And Sister Ruth was running the hospital. And she said, who's this group that keeps taking all of our business away? And so she met with me and said, I want you to come in and be part of our ambulatory department. So first job was the director, and was able to just work and participate. And she gave me more opportunities. She promoted me to the vice president of their ambulatory division, mostly to take that imaging business back that they had already stolen away from the hospital. But while I was there, she had been in Fresno at this hospital for about almost 30 years, 25, 26 years. And we got bought. So we were a Catholic hospital, and we got bought by Trinity Health. Trinity Health came in and they said, Sister Ruth, we appreciate all of the years of dedication you provided to us, but we need to bring in a Trinity person. So here's your severance. Thank you very much. 28 years, beloved in the community. And so she was somebody that was a mentor to me. And she said, Jason, if you want to sit in my shoes ever, you need to get experience in the for-profit world, because Trinity was a for-profit company. And so they felt like healthcare is no longer for the not-for-profits, that it's moving to this for-profit mentality. And so she helped me get a job with Tenet. And I remember distinctly, the celebration, as we're wishing her, farewell, and, whoever the new person was coming in. It was really sad, because you watch somebody that dedicated their heart and their soul and lived there 15 hours a day, because early in the morning, she wanted to meet with her early staff. Late in the evening, she wanted to meet with the medical staff meetings, and all those meetings were at night. They're on weekends, and whatever it took, that's what she would dedicate. So she was the first sort of image of what healthcare leadership should look like. And even to this day, I try to emulate, what I've. Over the course of, the next decade, I've had lots of great bosses and lots of really bad bosses. So she's one of the better ones because of what she would include you in and how she would communicate and give you opportunities. Her successor only lasted a year, 1 year, and then he was out. And then there was another person that came in 2 years and they were out. And it just shows culture means a lot. What you bring, there's a culture in your organization, whether you think there is one or not. And then whether you meet that culture and you can take that culture to another place, that if you go against the grain too much, culturally, you won't be accepted. And I thought that was a really good lesson, especially for a young leader that's trying to understand, like, how do I make an impact when I look 20 years younger than everybody else in the room and I have to make decisions. So I think one of the big lessons I learned is that, you know, whether you've got great leaders or bad leaders, you glean the things that you want to either emulate or the things you never ever want to become. And so I still hold that today. I remember all those bad bosses and exactly what I said I was never ever going to do. So I shared that, you know, I lived in the for-profit and not-for-profit world. And I, for the last maybe 15 years, was in that for-profit, publicly traded world. So some people have asked, you know, what's the difference? Why did you come to Hawaii? I think one of them was because I wanted to find a not-for-profit health system. And I wanted to find a community where I could raise my kids and not have them, you know, move schools ever. So I go into this company called Tenet. They have 86 hospitals all around the United States. And I got a reputation as the turnaround guy and the strategy guy. So when you have to turn a hospital around, usually it's short term. They give you like a year and a half to go turn a place around. And they're never in the most affluent communities. So I would go to a community and nobody likes you and you have to figure out, how are you going to turn it around? Most of the time you have a fire, you're going to have a layoff, you're going to renegotiate contracts. You're not going to let them spend on all the things that they get to spend on. And as soon as you start to turn the ship around, they tell you that there's a new place that you got to go. One thing I learned and how you build trust in an organization was, and there's so many young leaders that come into Tenet and other places because it's for healthcare executives, it's a good place to cut your teeth. They tell you exactly how to operate a hospital. They tell you what to look at. They tell you, you know, this is how you run a very tight healthcare ship. They're also extremely lean and they're not usually embraced by the community all the time. But the one thing I learned is that, you know, I represent that hospital, which is an asset to that organization, to Tenet. And I can come in here and I can cut everything out, but if I ruin their asset, I've ruined the value of this thing that they own, this property. And that property is something that they expect to make money for them for the next 100 years. And so I am responsible for making sure that we run a good ship, but we're not going to break the relationship with the community, break the trust. So that people don't believe that they can go to that hospital when they're sick or they're hurt. They're going to drive past it and go to the next one. You've ruined their asset. You've depreciated their asset. So every time, and when you're in a for-profit, especially if it's publicly traded, every quarter they're going to come back with earnings calls and they're going to ask, how are we doing? And, you know, if we're not doing that well, and they say, look, we need you to increase admissions or we need you to do more surgeries, like, how are you going to do that? So I always learned that if they ask you for $1 and you give them that $1, you have to at least tell them in fair balance, like, this is what's going to happen. We won't be able to answer the phones. People are going to be waiting longer in the emergency room. We're not going to be able to do this. And I think that was the trust that they built. Is that, okay, well, maybe we won't take that $1 from you, but we can offer that we'll grow. And so my vision was always to grow. And I think you'll start to see that translated, that instead of having to cut your way out of a problem, I'd much rather, you know, grow our way out of a problem. And so I love the fact that I'm here in Hawaii and I work for Queens, never leaving Queens unless they kick me out. But I love it because of the mission. It does everything it can, you know, to take care of the community first. We take care of the sickest, most vulnerable people. We're also the quaternary center, and we take care of the most sick. And during COVID, we learned this lesson that when people get sick or hurt, they're going to show up. And there was a time when we had 130. So we have 63 ICU bays. So these are bays for people that are really sick, especially for respiratory issues. And at our peak during the Delta surge, we had 130 patients inside of our hospital. So we had shut down surgery, we had shut down all these different spaces and made these makeshift ICUs so people can breathe. And we're watching young people in their 40s die. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Frank was there and got to like live through some of that with us. I think the one thing you learned is that when you are sick or hurt here in Hawaii, people trust Queens, and I think you can't let that go unrecognized and underappreciated. So we think about like the things that we invest in and how we want to grow and the decisions we have to make. We always still think that the community relies on us, whether you know it or not. Everyone's going to have a healthcare episode at some time. We want to make sure that we're there and you have trust that we'll be there for you. So aligning values, this is a lesson that I learned, a long time ago from some of those great bosses, not the bad bosses, but the great ones, who taught me this principle of heart, head, heart. Has anyone heard that? It's just sort of a principle to live by. So, there's always emotional things that happen. So when there's a situation, you have to make a decision. Naturally, you're going to have an emotional response, and that's the heart. You want to feel passionate about something that comes up. So if you don't feel inspired by something, you probably shouldn't opine on it. But then your head has to kick in, and you've got to think about things rationally. So you say, okay, emotionally, I want to make this decision, but there's information that you need to make good decisions. Then at the end of it, you go back to your heart, and then you feel good. You feel satisfied that you made the right decision. So I just bring this up as I was just preparing for actually a different speech. I went back and I thought about this principle that, everything that I do in my life, I try to make sure that I'm emotionally connected to the decision that we're making, that there's enough data to make the right decision, because I'm going to have to explain it to my staff, a board, my physicians. I might have to explain it to the community why we opened this program or why we closed this program or why we did something different. And you're not ever going to have a time when everybody thinks it's a great idea. In fact, most of the time it's very split. So if you can't rationalize and explain, look, we did this because, I believe in it. The data supports it. And at the end, I feel good about the decision that we made and I will continue to support it. Then, I think that's the way, we can think about these problems that we have. So I just share this view about aligning the values. Sometimes, people get into leadership positions and you make decisions and they're super fast. And it's easy to make fast decisions. And then you don't realize all the unintended consequences that you get to go clean up. And sometimes it's you make the decision and everybody else has to go clean up the mess for you. And then all of a sudden, you're eroding the trust in your team. So trust in your team, aligning your values, making sure people understand what you believe in and why you do the things you do, why you lead the way you lead. I think those are, tickets for success. Okay, so this is a picture of my son. He was born at 29 weeks and just under 2 pounds. And so the doctors one day, my wife calls me one day and she says, I think my water broke. We're in Texas. So, and this is not like Dallas, Texas or Houston. This is McAllen, Texas. McAllen, Texas is down by the Mexican border and the Rio Grande Valley. It's as far south as you could possibly go. If you hear these stories about drug cartels where they bring all their drugs in, it's right there. That's the exact place. And so Tenet asked me to go down and turn around this health system. It's called the South Memphis Health System. And they said, okay, don't look it on a map. Just let's go down there and take a look. And we did, and I found that, okay, I think we can do this, but we're only going to do it for 3 years. And this is my last stop before I came here. But while we're there, my son Christian was born. But my wife calls me one day. She says, I think my water broke. So what do you think your water broke? And she says, yeah, I'm driving our daughter to preschool. And I think, so come to my hospital and let's figure out what happened. So come to the emergency room and they put her on bed rest for about 6 days. They were able to hold the baby in for about 6 days and then he was born. It's the first thing when you have this baby that's this big is you panic. And the doctor says, have you held your baby yet? And this is the very first day, thinking that's not a good idea. You sure don't want me to hold that. I'm going to break it for sure. But they're like, no, you need to hold your baby. And so they do what's called kangaroo care. So you have this chair and you sit in the chair and they open up your shirt and they put the baby on your chest. And they found in places, third world countries mostly, where they don't have enough ventilators to keep the babies warm, that if you put the baby on the mother's chest, skin to skin, and they can hear your heartbeat and they can feel the energy, that the survival rate for these babies in a third world country was better than babies that were in these bassinets. So they promote it. So even though you can't be there 24 hours a day, the bassinet, and then they would ask you to come in, and you couldn't just stay for 15 minutes. You had to kind of set up with these fragile babies. You'd have to stay there and commit to 2 hours. So every morning from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I would sit, that was my time. My wife would be there like all the middle of the day, and I go again for like 3 or 4 hours in the evening. And today, he's the healthy boy. There's a story here about this NICU. So when I first get to South Texas, it was a turnaround project. McAllen Medical Center, it's a trauma one center, 550 beds, very similar to the Punch Bowl Hospital that you see there. And they had a 30-bed, 36-bed NICU, and they had one doctor there that was been there for 25 years, kind of like the controller. And the first thing you do when you show up is you start talking to doctors. And the first couple days, these OBs would come in and they're like, look, I don't trust the doctor that's running the NICU. It's only them. And then they have these two other people that kind of drop in every so often. But our death rate amongst neonates is like 3 times higher than the national average. So we don't trust it. We deliver most of our babies, our sick babies and sick moms across the street. And then we bring you the ones that are well. So you hear this enough and you're like, okay, so we got to do something. So you go up and you start interviewing and you realize like this is one of those like cultural like stones that's been there forever. And they have a lot of clout and a lot of power. And so you trying to displace this person is going to go back. They know a lot of people because of that political clout. They're going to try to say that Jason's not qualified. And so like try to run you out. But we made a decision after we interviewed a lot of people that no, something had to change. You know, the safety of this NICU is no good. The community is not trusting. If your physicians don't trust, they're telling their patients they don't trust that service too. And so we made the call and we changed. We actually fired that doctor. We brought in a new group of neonatologists. And the place that you never know where stars align is that my son was the beneficiary of that new medical staff that created a safer NICU, who had brought the survival rate back into like the national averages. And so you think about some of the things they're doing. They weren't intubating, timely. They weren't doing like the eye checks. They weren't doing the pressure. You can end up with pressure inside the brain when you're a neonate. All these things that you're supposed to do, we weren't following those protocols the old way. You had no clue. But I'm just so grateful that you follow your instincts. People that advise you that you need to do something differently and we can do things better. And so, it's personal. So when I think that healthcare is personal, even today, the reason why, we expand the emergency department is because we don't want anyone to have a bad experience in the ER. Wait. And things, reasons why we're trying to build the new hospital in Corona is because I think that we can expand better care. And you never know when you get to be a beneficiary of that care. Trying to changing a little bit, but one of the first times I met Brennan was because we were introducing the engineers and doctors together. I had gotten really interested and involved in innovation, so we created an innovation institute at Queens. And I'm a firm believer that technology is going to change the way that healthcare can be delivered. So we've come a long ways over the years with like electronic medical records, from paper records. Now, you can do remote patient monitoring, a lot of these things, but it's not really fully adopted yet. And so this is just a series of infographics that share some of the stuff that we're doing. So we created this Akagi Command Center. So today, every patient within the Queens system and every patient in the state, I can see them on this monitor in this room that's over on King Street. And you can imagine air traffic control for like an airport. It's a room kind of like this, and it's got monitors all over the wall, and you can see every patient by name and what they need next. And I'm a firm believer that real-time monitoring of patients. So if a patient all of a sudden has blood pressure that elevates, we can see, and there's a flag, and somebody sitting in a chair watching these monitors can see that and say, oh, I wonder if the nurse saw that too on the floor and called them. And most of the time, they're like, oh, I didn't see that yet. I've been busy taking care of these other 5 patients. I haven't seen that. And I can go in and I can address it. If somebody is laying in a room and they need an MRI before they can go home, we can run a list and see all the patients that need something so that they can go home, and then call them and say, you've got to prioritize these patients first. There's patients over on Neighbor Island. So we're the trauma center. And I was surprised that we take about 70% of all the transfers from Neighbor Islands because they need higher level of care. Doesn't matter if you're in Hilo or Kona or even at Queens Medical Center West. We take transfers in all the time as the trauma center. And in the past, it was paper. I was surprised at the process. You go watch them and they say, oh, they pick up the phone and they answer the call from Hilo, and the Hilo doctor says, hey, this is Dr. So-and-so. I have a patient that needs dialysis. We don't have dialysis. And say, I'm sorry, we don't have any beds. Call everywhere else, and if you don't get it anywhere, then call us back. And we'd hang up, they'd hang up, and there'd be no list of that patient that's sitting over there in Hilo that needed something. Felt like one, that's not right. And then we started running data and we found that 50% of the transfer requests were being denied by Queens. 50%. And if you're a trauma center, taking care of patients in other places from Hilo, and I don't have any neurosurgeons, and I have a patient that needs a neuro consult, and I can't get them over here, that's not good. And so we said, we have to do something differently. So we can also watch every patient. That's why we said we need to watch every patient in the state and put them on these lists. So I can now see that there's 15 patients right now that need to be transferred to Queens. And I can prioritize which ones need to be here first. So I might only have 8 beds. So let's take the 8 sickest patients right now, and then we can help telephonically monitor those patients, those other 7. So the hospital at Hilo doesn't feel like they're just all by themselves. So can we improve patient care through technology? I really do believe we can. There was an article written about 9 months ago that Mark Benioff and a couple of his friends bought a big helicopter. So right now, if you're on a neighbor island, you probably don't know it, but you get ambulance to the airport, you get put on an airplane. That airplane flies over to Honolulu Airport, you put on an ambulance, you get driven over to Kapiolani or Queens, if depending on whatever it is, but there's no helicopters that can transport patients from rooftop to a rooftop. And most of the times, because it's expensive, it takes $5 million a year just to maintain the helicopter, and it takes about $20 million to buy the helicopter. So how do you do that? Benioff decided he's going to donate a helicopter to this. So we have this new twin engine H-145 that can seat 12 people and can fly across the channel. And as we're building and talking to people in Kona, we're selling them that this is going to change the way trauma care, stroke care, you have a heart attack, because the patient will end up in the emergency department. They'll get the medication to try to break down the clot. You put them in the helicopter, you fly them straight over to the Punch Bowl hospital, and that might take an hour. So what used to be about 5 hours in transport can now be done in an hour. So you think about the golden window, preserving the golden window. Technology, I fully believe, can help preserve that. So more time that you save, the more brain you save, more heart tissue, and that means longer quality of life and better recovery. There's a lot of other technology, AI is one of them, but big investments in. Fully believe that AI has the right place. I think the part that we're most cautious about is there's governance around AI. That we don't want our AI to be doing the job of our doctors. We want the AI to assist and co-pilot for the doctor. So in places, it might find things that the doctors missed. And we've got some really good examples of lung nodules that have been found in a program through AI. So I think that figuring out where it's right and where it's not right is like, that's the future of AI and health. So here are some images of things that we are doing. On the top left is the new hospital that we want to build over in Kona. It's just a rendering, but then the top right is the new emergency department that just broke ground over at West. The bottom is the new emergency department that just opened, and the bottom is the master plan for the Punch Bowl campus that we had put together as part of the PRU. When we talk about healthcare, it's expensive. And so if you can imagine sort of, you've got these 2 lines, revenue and expense. And you need your revenue to constantly be going up because your expense line is also going up, and you need the revenue line to be above the expense line. If you ever decide that you are full, and we are running at both the West hospitals and the Punch Bowl hospitals 102%, 100% all the time. So this massive game of, we've got 80 admissions today, which means we have to have 80 discharges in order to balance everything out. Some days we do really well, and some days we don't, and there's patients sitting in the hallways of the emergency room waiting for beds. Happens a lot, and that's what we're trying to solve. When you do that, at some point, you can't grow your revenue fast enough because there's no more places to put patients, no more ORs to do more surgery. And so the expense line, which isn't gonna stop, is your revenue line is gonna bend and they cross. So we know that we have to grow access. The demand is there that we need to continue to grow. What's not on here is that we bought the hospital at Wahiwa, which was a big deal. We bought Kahimohala, which was a behavioral health hospital. The Kona hospital is exciting because we're creating a regional health system. And if you think about Kona and maybe the entire Big Island, about 200,000 people, about 100,000 on the Hilo side. Between North and Kona, you have about 100,000 people on that side too. There's not enough patients to serve all those people, to support all the doctors. So if you can imagine, you've got North Hawaii Community Hospital, just Queens, you've got Kona Hospital, and you have Hilo. There are oncologists at each one of them, one. And every couple of years, they all quit and they go somewhere else and they have to bring somebody else in. Right now, all of them are local. We have these temporary doctors providing the care there. And you're in shock, you're like, why? It's because one doctor isn't going to be able to, be supported by such a small community. And so we're creating this regional health system that we believe can take care of that community better if you combine the populations and have one destination that's oncology and one destination that's cardiology. And then we can rotate from Oahu all of the other very unique specialists, like those very precise cardiologists and those very specific neurologists over there once a week, once every 2 weeks to take care of patients. So the vision of where healthcare for Queens is going is that we want to be able to make sure that everyone has access to care locally. So if you are residing on the Big Island or if you reside on Maui, that you can get the care right there in your island. You don't have to get on an airplane and fly over here. And so you'll see us continue to push for growth and push for innovation inside of there. So these new centers allow us to be state of the art and also provide access in ways that people just expect. Because I bet none of you have thought that, I'm going to move to Maui and they don't have neurologists, they don't have cardiologists, and they don't have any traumatologists. So if I'm a retiree and that's the fastest growing population on Maui, not a really good place to retire. So I feel like it's our responsibility to help rebuild some of that.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Are you guys buying Kuakini?
So that has just come up in the last week. So we have been talking with Kuakini a lot about we can partner with them to keep them sustainable, but we are not in a position to buy them. What we do have is joint venture. We have a lot of their clinic space. We take 40 of their beds for inpatients that we have. But yeah, that's a challenged one. So they've waited a long time and have not reinvested back in themselves. And I don't know that anyone's going to be able to really salvage that hospital. I do think it can be repurposed though. And so only a couple more slides, but we're always grounded in our founders. I don't know how many of you know the history of Queens, but we were founded by Queen Emma and King Kamehameha IV. Back in the 1850s, they were in their mid-20s, and they're watching the Native Hawaiian population die over the course of time, and felt like they have to do something. But they didn't have money. They went door to door and they raised $13,000. And that $13,000 created the first Queens Hospital, which is still on the property where the Punch Bowl campus is today. And the mission that they have has not changed much over that 160 years. It's to provide in perpetuity quality healthcare services to improve the well-being of Native Hawaiians and all the people of Hawaii. And I think that for me personally, I found the place, that means so much to a community that it's fulfilling for me, and that I have an opportunity to make sure that we live our mission for at least my tenure there. I'll tell you a story about the Native Hawaiians and all the people of Hawaii part of this mission. So King Kamehameha, when he was young, they wanted him to be educated. So he got on a boat, he went over to the United States, and he's going through the South. He happens to be in Georgia on his way up to Philadelphia for different meetings. And while he was there, he's dark complected. And does anyone know what's going on in the 1850s? Civil War is the cusp of the Civil War. So he's going through, they won't let him sit on the trains, in the front of the trains. They wouldn't let him go into certain restaurants. And so he journals about how foolish the people are on the mainland and why he likened actually his alignment with Britain more than he did the United States. But when he came back to Hawaii, he said, I will never allow someone to be treated the way I was treated during this trip. And so all the people of Hawaii became part of who we are. So I think early pioneers and things, this is like a diversity, equity, inclusion pioneer, whether we knew it or not. Queen Emma, when she founded the hospital and it was first open, we used to come, and it was very ward style. So it was almost like a room like this, and patients would be kind of lined up, divided by curtains. And it wasn't like individual hospital rooms. There was no surgery, there was no medicine, there was no emergency departments. She would go, and so the hospital, what could a hospital do back then? They could provide you shelter, it could provide you food and warmth and company. And she would come by every day and she'd round on all the patients. And so in many regards, we view her as one of our first volunteers. So our volunteer program kind of emulates Queen Emma coming in and providing to the needs and tending to those patients that just don't want to be in the hospital. Nobody wants to be in the hospital. And so, we remain grounded in our founders. And I think that's one of the special things about Queens. I think this is my last slide, and I'll open up to any questions. But this is a quote that when I first became a CEO, it was at this heart hospital. And you're young and you're trying to figure out like how do you get an organization to follow. And this was a quote that I had read that came out of, I think Steve Jobs was doing a commencement speech. I think it was at the University of Stanford, even though he didn't graduate from Stanford. But it's about faith, and so, you think about like how you line up your life or what you want to do. And there's no instructions. There's nothing that tells you got to do step A, B, C, D, and D in order to get to where you want to go. That you've got to have some belief in the plan that you put forward. You have to have some faith that it will work out, because those dots don't connect looking forward. They only connect when you're looking backwards. So I thought that this quote kind of defined, our moment. And again, that first opportunity to be a CEO was at a turnaround. And so you're trying to convince this organization that the decisions that you're making, even though some of them are hard, we can't serve, the doctor's free dinner every night, that they're for a purpose. And so I shared this with them in a letter, and, they rallied around it. And, I feel like this is kind of very fitting for my life, that a lot of the things that we're doing, I got cast into the CEO position on a Friday. So July 11th, July 12th, and on July 11th, it was a Thursday in the morning, I found out from our board that I was going to be in that position the next day. And so with 24 hours notice, you went from being the COO of the system, which is very different than being the CEO. And you've got to then tell the board, okay, this is my plan. This is what we're going to do. And we were trying to turn ourselves. We had just been digging out of COVID over this past year, and finances were struggling. And so we needed to have a plan to get us going forward. So again, it comes back to believing in your plan, having faith that it'll work, and then trusting the people around you. So I think that is my last slide. And I'll open up to any questions that anyone has. Yeah.
So for the younger guys here, how do you guide them in transition? Because they're mechanical, they're engineers, so they're technical. How do you transition them from technical people into executive management?
Yeah. So it's this like left brain, right brain a little bit. And I'm very left brain myself. So I like structure, I like analog. But I think that there's a moment that everyone has to be able to step out of the weeds. You can get so drawn into the problem that you're trying to solve and miss sort of the big picture of the landscape that's ahead of you. And so I encourage everybody to take a step out of the moment and be able to look at the macro in as clear vision as you can. And sometimes I'll tell you this funny story. So I go to the Big Island. I was invited to do a 2-day meditation by Mark Benioff. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, like I've never meditated. It's kind of silly. And you go. And at first, they tell you, one, you got to check in all your devices, so no technology. And then 2, you can't talk. 2 days, you can't talk. She's like, all right, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do for 2 days. But in it, they tell you and they teach you ways of different types of meditation. I think what I boiled it down is you don't have to believe in all the different types of meditation. I don't feel like I practiced it very well at all. But I think the one thing that I did learn is that meditating is just a way to clear your mind, focus on the thing that's ahead of you, and then focus in front of you. And not to look at the distractions that are on the side. Because there's so many distractions every day that we are very rarely get a chance to actually think about where we want to be 10 steps ahead of us. And so the meditation principles were really around just shut everything off, get out of the weeds, get out of the distracting on the sides, and like focus out here because there's so much in ahead of you. And I think that's, applicable to, engineering or anything, in life where you're going from the work that you do, you want to be an expert in the work that you do. Because it's great to be a subject matter expert, value in being a subject matter expert, but also being able to put those pieces together with the rest of the world is necessary. I think you'll find small opportunities where you can make that bridge. Then you got to find those bigger opportunities where you can connect it with bigger things. And I think that that's where the convergence really happens. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Sister Ruth and how she was a pretty big mentor to you in your career. When you are a mentor, what would be the one main goal for you to achieve with your mentee?
Yeah, I actually love being a mentor. And I do it with the university's Scheidler College. And I think the one thing that lots of people come in with is that they're pretty fixed on like what they want to accomplish. So they're here and they want to ask 4 questions about this, and this, and it's very specific. And I think when you're in the mentor-mentee relationship, and I've been on both sides, is every mentor has different expertise and different ways of communicating and different ways of engaging. And so when you get into, you want to set some expectations on the things you'd like to talk about. What do you ultimately want to achieve, whether it's one conversation or it's a series of conversations? And allow the mentor to kind of craft around, because there's this filling out. It's almost a dance where you think about how does the mentee like to learn and listen? And then what kind of expertise can I offer? And as you start to connect where the most value comes out, then I think that's where magic can happen. And so if it comes in and I just want to ask you, what's your favorite color? How did you get where you are? How many kids do you have? It's very robotic. And I think what you want to get out of like a mentorship is the personalization of that relationship. And I feel like I've become a much better mentor, over the years. My relationships with some of the mentees that I've had over the past 4 or 5 years in particular, I've still maintained those relationships. So like the Scheidler relationship, you meet every month for like a series of 4 months, it's like 4 times. I've continued to meet with my mentees every month for the last like 4 years. And so I think that those relationships.
I also have a question. So like out of all the projects that you've worked on and all the hospitals you've turned around, which one was like the most impactful to you and really helped shape you as a leader today?
Yeah, I think the one that sticks in my mind the most is we had a hospital called Edinburgh Regional Medical Center. Had 2 hospitals, Children's Hospital and an adult hospital. And this is also down in the Rio Grande Valley, part of the South Texas Health System. And children's hospitals are very different than adult hospitals, but very similar in a lot of respects too. But they get paid differently, the medical staffs are very different. And so you almost have this like divide in between. And in this particular hospital, which happened to be 2 that look like they're one, you get constantly fighting over budget, over who gets resources. There's only so many capital dollars you can put in, and children always feel the children's hospital always felt like they are the most important because they're taking care of the future. And then you have the adults taking care of the most chronic patients and like the most acute patients. And the one that was the most meaningful to me was being able to sit there and get these two medical staffs that did not get along and constantly felt like they were fighting with each other to support one another. And then all of a sudden, your pediatric surgeons who can do adults would come over and help take call and support the adults. And your adult general surgeons who can do kids down to like 12 years old or 10 years old would come over and they'd support. But before, they wouldn't, because they were pitted against each other in an environment where, you did better this month because you had more surgeries, and you did better because you had more emergency room. And so I think that just being able to change culture, and it's very few times you actually get to change the culture of an organization, that it means it's meaningful. Good question.
I have another one. So a lot of us are college students. So I just had a question. If there was something that you know now that you could go back in time and tell your younger self when you just graduated college, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many things, so many lessons there. I think that one is back then, I always felt like I was high anxiety. There were so many things I felt like I had to do. I was trying to figure out my career path and where I was going to go. And I've run into so many like dead ends. But I would say experience everything you can. I used to think that, so I was a pre-med finance major. And so I would stick to biology and finance. And I never even left the college buildings sometimes, because that's where I would just want to dedicate my time, understand like where my path was in biology, where my path was in finance. But when you connect the dots between like all the different resources you have, here at the university, and there's so many here at the University of Hawaii, that's rich. And I think that it can help create a more diverse, colorful, tapestry that will ultimately be your career in your life. So just enjoy all of it, because it goes by very fast. And then two, embrace everything that's around you, because I went to the University of Arizona, and I go back on campus and I can distinctly recall like the 5 buildings that I spent my time in, which represents like 12% of the campus. And I would say I don't even know how to navigate the rest of the campus. Yeah.
What major did you study when you were in Arizona? Like what classes did you take?
Yeah, so I was a pre-med, so I thought I was gonna be a doctor. So I have 2 sides. My mom's side are farmers, and then my dad's side are all doctors. And I thought I was gonna follow my dad's footsteps. And when I was there, you take all the traditional biology, anatomy, and everything else. But going into my sophomore year, my dad and my uncle were like, don't go into medicine. It's so hard in California. I work so hard and I'm so underpaid, and you're not going to like it. The future is very bleak. Go into something else. And so I chose finance. And so the balance between all of the traditional finance classes, in the end, I felt like in today, I would say like the path of medicine would have been fantastic. I would have been extremely fulfilled, and it would have been great. I'm grateful though that I had a chance to learn about 2 things. And my first job right out of school, I didn't know what it was going to be. It didn't meet finance, it didn't meet biology. It was being a courier for that imaging center. And so, I think that putting all those pieces together between finance and biology, I think allowed you to maybe understand a little bit about what science does, but then also the rigors of, or what biology does, and then the rigors of finance at the same time. There's no bad path. There's no wrong path. Other questions?
I guess I have another question.
Sure.
So a lot of us here are engineering students. So I know you talked about the importance of technology and healthcare, but what practical advice would you give engineering students if they want to enter the healthcare sector, like from a technical aspect?
Yeah, it depends on if you want to get into like biomedical, because I think that's a great path. But if you want to get into innovation, and I've had a chance to meet a number of the faculty here, and I think there's a really bright opportunity for healthcare, in particular Queens and Department of Engineering, to work closely together. So we had Professor Tyler Ray come share what he's doing with these biological patches. And I think the encouragement I would have is that there's a lot of stuff that happens here that finishes in a lab. So these great ideas, they stop in a lab and they're never introduced to us for the translational component. And I think that that's what we know. So you can take these great ideas and translate them onto a patient population and then create data that can hopefully, and I'd love to see a collaboration where we can take something to market, that we can patent things and do some very interesting, innovative work. Any other questions? Yeah.
So are your doctors embracing AI as part of the diagnosis tool?
So they were scared to death of it at first, and then now they're starting to embrace it. So there's maybe 3 areas I'll share. One of them is DAX. So that is a large language interpretation model, and primary care is using it right now. But I can talk to you, if I'm a doctor and you're the patient, we can just talk. And it transcribes it into the medical record. So I'm not sitting over here typing the whole time. They've said, of all the pilots, please just don't take that one away.
Oh.
So they're embracing that. The other is radiology. So our radiologists who are deathly afraid of AI, they thought that was going to put them out of a job. We are so short on radiologists right now that they've come back to us and said, look at this technology, or look at this technology, or look at this company, because we heard it can help. And they want us to bring in things that can help them. So we're embracing it right now, and they've embraced it. We're trying to figure out which ones can actually make their workload smaller, not bigger. And then there's another technology we have called Telem, and it looks at every time someone comes in and gets a CT scan or an X-ray of your chest. You might be in there for pneumonia, and they take an X-ray of your chest, and they see it, and they're like, oh, it's not pneumonia, and they put it away. But there's sometimes these incidental findings, these lung nodules that you might have. So this AI goes and it scours all the old CTs and X-rays that were done, and it's found 500 lung nodules are undetected. So we have a physician that then goes and biopsies them and checks to see. Today, we found 30 patients that had a lung cancer that was undiagnosed. So I think there's really good application.
We have time for one last question.
All right.
From your perspective, what does Hawaii need most from the next generation of leaders?
I think that we need authenticity, and I think that we need people that can bring communities together. Doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter where you come from, that one, be an authentic leader that understands like who you are and what you can provide back to the community, your value, and then be brave enough to uphold those values when pressured. I think that that's something that's really, really unique but important. I think the other is that being able to bring communities together. So whether they are different ethnicities together, whether they're different backgrounds, whether different like geographic areas together, it doesn't have, we end up in these like little silos. So I think that leadership in Hawaii is so important. And whether you make it to the governor's office or you're just, leading in our own small way, everyone has an opportunity to be a leader. I just encourage you all to continue to think about yourselves as such. But thank you for the opportunity. What I usually do is bring like a stack of cards, and on my card I have my email address and my cell phone number, and I left it on my desk. So I will bring it back because I do believe in like connection and being able to provide mentorship and answer questions that people have, and staying connected. It's all part of being in that community. So I will get them back to everybody and they can figure out how you can share those. But thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I really genuinely appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to close this out. Dean Morioka had to run, but thank you so much, Jason.
Yeah.
Really inspiring. I want to work at Queens now. I love the College of Engineering, but yeah, no, you're doing great things and just really appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, and next month we have Laura Beeman. She is our women's Wahine basketball coach. So we're really excited to hear her story. We had Timmy Chang last year, right? So kind of bringing another perspective from athletics. And we can also email everyone that registered for the seminar. We can actually email out your card info. So if you registered, we can get Jason's info to you. So thank you guys. And thanks to those on Zoom, and we'll see you guys next month. Aloha.